An impending financial disaster. We showed you pictures of Chinese citizens protesting at the corporate headquarters of Evergrande, the biggest player in Chinese real estate, also the world's most indebted real estate company at the moment. Evergrande owes more than $300 billion, $300 billion. It is already missing its loan payments. Some protesters have tried to commit suicide just to make a point. It's a serious crisis. A collapse of Evergrande could start a financial pandemic. We've been reporting on this. Turns out the problem is bigger than what we initially saw. The United States too is staring at defaults. And I'm not talking about a company here. I'm talking about the government. The government of the United States of America could default on its own debts. American citizens could run out of cash. And if that happens, scenes like the ones we witnessed from China could play out in the US too. Such a situation will be a financial Armageddon. What are world leaders doing about it? What are Chinese and American leaders doing about it? Not very much so far. More than 100 leaders have gathered in New York, but they have said nothing about the debt troubles of the US and China and how they will impact the rest of the world. Are they ignoring an impending global financial crisis? Our next report tells you why the world needs to brace for this. On Tuesday, Xi Jinping had a message for world leaders. The Chinese president wants them to focus on post-pandemic recovery.
We must revitalize the economy and pursue more robust, greener and more balanced global development. Development holds the key to people's well-being. Facing the severe shocks of COVID-19, we need to work together to steer global development towards a new stage of balanced, coordinated and inclusive growth.
The global economy is still reeling from the pandemic that began in China. Now the Chinese could unleash another pandemic, a financial one, something that Xi Jinping did not talk about at the United Nations General Assembly. China's biggest real estate player, Evergrande, is a ticking time bomb. It owes more than $300 billion to various creditors, money it cannot pay back. On Monday, Evergrande missed interest payments to two large banks. By Thursday, the company has payments worth $120 million due. Evergrande has struck a deal to make one of these payments, but that doesn't even begin to solve the crisis. China's Evergrande is being compared to Lehman Brothers, the company that was audited by Ernst & Young. This is the office of Ernst & Young. They had to settle for $10 million for helping Lehman Brothers dupe investors. That was the charge against them. Now China's Evergrande possibly faces the same fate, although Chinese state media say that this is a company that is too big to fail. We know better than to put our trust in the Chinese basket. The question is, what are world leaders going to do about it? This is an impending financial pandemic that may start in China and spread to the rest of the world. As world leaders gather here this week for the United Nations General Assembly, are they going to come up with a plan to deal with this? Or are they going to brush it under the carpet? The collapse of Evergrande will have a ripple effect on the rest of the world. The company has borrowed money from practically everyone. Its creditors range from banks to suppliers to average Chinese citizens. Evergrande took cash deposits from more than 1 million home buyers. They're yet to deliver these apartments. The company borrowed from tens of thousands of its own employees. Even foreign creditors have a sizable exposure. Evergrande owes them $20 billion, and that may just be the tip of the iceberg.
The Chinese government tends to try to hide these problems under a sea of liquidity, and the level of transparency and corporate governance is quite limited relative to other economies. So it's very difficult for us to know the true extent of the financial hole of both Evergrande and the property developer sector. If they decide to bail out Evergrande, the problem might be, as we saw, for example, in the Lehman crisis, that they need to bail out not just Evergrande, but other property developers.
The warnings were always there. Last year, a report said that China's property boom is a $52 trillion bubble. Evergrande could just be the first of the many companies to fail. By August this year, Chinese developers had defaulted on more than $6 billion worth of loans. The Evergrande crisis is eerily similar to what happened in America in 2008, and it could have an impact on the US economy. Washington has not raised any alarm bells yet because they're fighting their own battles. America, the biggest economy in the world, is facing a cash crunch. Here in America, there's a new fear that the country is running out of money, and this could happen as early as October, that's next month. I'm standing in front of the US Department of Treasury, and the mood in this building is tense. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has issued a warning to American lawmakers. She's asked them to raise the debt ceiling. And this is a request that has gone to the US Capitol not once, not twice, but numerous times. Yellen says that the US is heading into a new financial crisis, and that soon millions of Americans may not have enough cash, that American soldiers overseas may not get their pay. The question is, how did things come to such a pass? Were there no warnings? And what does this crisis mean for America's grand plans, more specifically Joe Biden's $3.5 trillion spending plan? This problem is about America's massive national debt. It stands at around $28.4 trillion as of today. This is the maximum the American government can borrow. But even with these loans, the Biden administration is unable to meet its expenses. Sometime in October, the US government could default on these loans. Millions of Americans could be strapped for cash. Nearly 50 million senior citizens will stop getting their Social Security checks. And American soldiers may not get their salaries. The Biden administration has no option but to borrow more. Else the federal government will not be able to pay its bills. US President Joe Biden is facing opposition from his own party. The Democrats hold the majority in the US Congress, but they're pushing back against Biden's spending plans. The United States and China are the world's biggest economies. They're both staring at defaults. This economic distress is an indication of a brewing global financial crisis, one that could kick off a financial pandemic at a time when the world is still struggling with the Wuhan virus. Bureau Report, WION, World is One. WION is now available in your country.